opening section, in addition to a few other excerpts from some of the initial pages. The boy lived with the woman out in the wilderness in her house underground. It was lodged in a cliff that overlooked the river, and from her back porch one could peer out into blue mountains that knelt before the tundra. When the boy was young, he would sit with the woman on the back steps and watch the sun fall for 7 days behind the wasteland. In its last hours, the sun moldered from blood to black fire, then ashes. It would not return for 3 months. Then the cold came. It snaked through the meadows and froze the river into concrete. Soon death arrived with a rotting ox, and they harvested the grasslands and lumbered the woodlands. And the moon rose from its wintry grave in the east and climbed for 1 week towards its zenith. After peaking for 3 days, it receded down the same line from which it rose, settling back into its grave, where it lay for 2 weeks before its resurrection. During the lunar noon, there was enough light for the boy to play outside. He ate grits and salted pork for breakfast, and then stood by the fire while the woman dressed him, covering all of him but his eyes. Then he went alone into the woods to spend the day trekking down the frozen river bank and into the forest's catacombs. There the winds were graver and the scenery sparser, and only when the fear began its fermentation in his belly was he relieved. Acquiring a taste for the feeling, his fondness gave rise to infatuation, and enslaved to the sublime, the boy each time was taken farther. He sought the point where matter decayed into noise and void, and the ground fell out from beneath his feet. On long walks, when his throat dried up, he would talk idly to himself to keep it from freezing, or hammer out a melody and sing until his voice cracked. In this way, he began to envisage a companion. At first, he spoke only in rambles, and only to himself, but over time, his thoughts hardened into coherent phrases that addressed another. When he cast his voice out into the dark, he could stand still and listen to the wind, or a threadbare whisper sown in the drone, or a sigh that would bellow in the ground. He would sweep away the snow and cup his ear against the frozen earth to detect vibrations. They boiled in the deep and rose to the surface. Though he confided in the woods, he had a healthy fear of it. A slap of cold across the eyes was enough to remind him that he could be stolen and delivered into the mountain's crypts. In the trenches, he imagined himself the earth's sole remaining caretaker. Rows of black trunks without branches became, to him, the skeletons of gods. When he grew older, he succeeded to undertaker, and of the graves which covered all the earth, he was keeper, the solitary soul who serviced the dead, summoning them from their slumbers and ushering them into the afterlife. And when the hours wearied, the exhausted boy turned around. He sensed when the hour was late and when the woman had grown worried. She did not like it when he went out alone, but in the twilight season, when he would have no choice but to stay indoors for days, the boy complained that his mind felt ill and that the house was paling. He refused meals, did not sleep or talk, and to the woman his presence faded altogether. Though she did not go, she let him play by the river, when the moon had peaked and its light was brightest. When the boy returned, he traveled upriver to her house, the one visible side breaching the face of the cliff to eye the water. Through the window he saw fire and the woman cooking. Climbing the slope, he called for her from the back door, and when she let him in, he could see his absence buried in her face. He stripped off the soggy linens and stood next to the fire on the hearth. That part of the day he remembered best, when the house was safe and the woman spent the evening nursing him. The two chatted while she finished the meal. Brushing him aside, she retrieved from the fire a cast-iron pot that was frothing over with the smell of onions. "May I go out tomorrow too?" he said. "Sorry, child, but today was the last day. Tomorrow it'll be dark early." "What will I do?" "You can help me in the kitchen. I have corn to grind if we want to eat hominy, and I'll need a man to help." Reaching into the fire, she pulled out a kettle of boiling water and handed it to him. "There's a fresh bath in there," she said. "With you lagging, though, it's probably gotten cold." Down through the parlor and the bathroom, was a half-filled basin that stood on 4 brass claws. Though the water was too hot, the boy emptied the kettle into the tub, and soaking a while he dozed off. When the water grew cold, he woke up and got out, and closed himself in the woman's bedroom to dry and change into new linens. Back in the kitchen, you could see that the woman was tired. A few months prior, she had sprained her ankle on the back steps, so that now, after standing for hours, she limped slightly. The boy began to set the table, a long oak spread that ran wall to wall, fetching 2 glasses of fresh water from the cooler by the front door. The two sat catty-cornered and ate beans over rice by candlelight. Neither talked. Then he helped the woman clear the table and straighten up the kitchen, putting a few logs into the fire and sweeping up the chips and the sawdust around the perimeter of the hearth. He sealed the window with an insulated panel to guard the house's warmth. Outside, the snow had thickened. In the living room, the boy sat with the woman on a red bench and practiced reading, and when he felt spent, he lay his head in her lap. She picked up his book and balanced it on his back, reading aloud and tossing her fingertips through his hair. And as he fell asleep, she pulled him up and led him into his room, where he fell into his bed. "Get up under your covers," she said. She pulled them out from underneath him, and then up to his chin so that the cold sheet kissed his neck. He reached out and grabbed her arm so that the faceless figure reclined alongside him on the mattress. The roar of sleep rose in him like a flood, drawing him back into a black river. Her words fell upon him like gusts of wind. Entrenched in the torrents, he yielded to the undertow and inhaled the water and was buried under layers of noise. His last thoughts were of the train sounding from the other side of the river and of some burly woodsman and a mountain lion who watched from the corner.
And now, we would like to open up the floor.
I will.
Thank you.
Who wants to speak?
Someone will.
All right. 2 very short poems by Racy Connor. Thank you very much.
Nice boots.
Thank you. I have not written a poem about them yet, but I will. I want one of you to write poetry about the boots I'm wearing right now. Look at the backs. That's the backs.
That's fun, too.
Thank you. Sit her down now. Why are my socks strewn about like abandoned relics of the past, left on their own with only their wits to survive them? And the father said, "Natural selection, my son, thy laundry calleth thee hence."